Well, hi everyone. I hope you're having a good day. I've had a very good day. So I just want to introduce you to episode 8. This is going to be Constantine, a conclusive fraud. We need to get this solidly affirmed and cleared up. Make sure it's not in anyone's doubt about it. And this speaks volumes about his defenders and protectors, even to this day, even within Protestantism. And we're going to see all these bootlickers, parasites, just a whole problem that we as Christians really have to come to grip with. That this isn't just a Roman Catholic problem, and we've departed from them. It's creeped into everything of our own perspective. In other words, we are living still in a Constantinian bubble. And the actual self delusion is we thought by getting away and creating Protestantism, where we retreated into Paul, was the way out. That was the way deeper into it. So we didn't get out from underneath what we were supposed to get out from underneath. So this is important. We really fundamentally have to shift our perspectives and just basically find Christ again. I mean, it's right there in the Bible, but somehow we keep avoiding it. Whatever. Anyway, so last episode was, did Paul abolish Sabbath? And we showed that. We're going to review that quickly today. And this what attracted Constantine's Christianity, and that's our theory. And we're gradually proving that. And we're going to show you it has to be the only reason he's really going with us. I mean, he doesn't care about faith alone, all these other things. He wants you to worship him. So let's really look at something, and what is going to astonish you, because I'm going to show you opinions, reputable people who seem to know nothing about the evil side of this man. I don't mean his killing of his own son and nephew and all these other things that are horrible things that he did too. I'm talking about his deliberate putting 3 years after Nicaea, he's put his face on a statue at Byzantium, in Byzantium, at Constantinople, the city he's created for himself, that makes him God Sol Invictus. His face, 40 feet tall, huge, monolith thing, so that people would worship Sol Invictus with his face on the statue, on the inside of it. Ugh. But of course, there's a piece of the cross in the base, and there's some other, relics or whatever. This is the whole idea. This is complete paganism. You can't take something that's pagan and then make it some sort of Christian thing by putting a piece of the cross. And I think they had some of the crosses from the two thieves. I mean, come on. So we're going to go into this. It's important. And then we're going to kind of come out of it, and we're going to show you it's going to lead into the issue about Passover, why we don't observe it, and why it became Easter, and all of that. And we're going to try to do this in a short period of time. So let's get going. Okay, so to remind ourselves, why is this whole thing about Constantine on our mind? Because Paul's writings were zero. Nobody was paying attention to Paul. Virtually nobody's commenting on him until the 300s. Everybody else is getting, Gospels are being discussed, Peter, all these things, but Paul, no. So, but Paul's writings for the first time were taken very seriously, and we're now officially being promoted in the mid 300s to the mid 400s. And this is in a book or article of Thomas Martin called Vox Pauli, the voice of Paul, in the Journal of Early Christian Studies. And he says from the mid 300s to the 400s, there was a marked turn towards the figure and theology of Paul, indicated by the flurry of commentaries on Paul's letters written during that period. Okay, so anyway, we're going to show you, just going to review some of the things we've already seen, some things you're going to see for the first time. By the way, I found this in an interesting website called Reformation.org, and it just really puts it right. The greatest hoax in the entire history of the world was Constantine substituted for Christ. Yes, he thought he was the Christ. In other words, he, by making Jesus Sol Invictus, which is what is happening to our Christ, and then him making Sol Invictus himself, he's now become the new Christ. This, you won't believe it until I show it to you, and you're going to see it, because there's some drawings and paintings from that era. Constantine was a clear fraud. Despite the claim that he saw a vision of Jesus and a sign in the sky, by this cross you shall win the battle, in 312 AD. This is, and by the way, people who are Constantinian fans, and this is mainstream Christianity, Protestants, Catholics, they all claim he was converted in 312 AD, but they have no explanation. Then why did he have his coin program identifying him as the best friend of Sol Invictus year after year after year, at least through 318, and there's some indication it was even later. I mean, come on. And then anyway. So this is Milvian Bridge. Constantine never told anyone in Christian leadership until 324 AD that he was a Christian. No, he didn't even say he was a Christian. He said, I had a vision. See, he comes into it where you have to believe him. Oh, I had a vision. I saw Jesus in the sky. I saw it said in words and Latin, whatever, in this cross or in this sign you will conquer. And it was some sort of hero or something like that. The Constantine Arch, though, was built in 315 AD to commemorate the Milvian Bridge victory. And what do you think? The exterior events of the battle thanks primarily the god of the sun for victory. There is no symbol of the cross or anything like a chi in a row for Christ's name. So it's a complete fraud. I mean, come on. If that is the turning point of your life and you're converted, forget it. And why do you come out in the open only for the first time in 324? If it happened in 312, what's the delay for 12 years? And does he really even convert? Does he show anything? No. It's whoever says these things are just, and these are mainstream Christian scholars, talk about his conversion as if it's fact. Okay, despite claiming a conversion of sorts in 312 AD by his vision, and okay. Oh yeah. So Constantine continued the Sol Invictus coin program to 317 AD for sure, and apparently until 321 AD, right? And he did all these other battles in the meantime, by the way, but he never uses the Cairo again on any of the shields, which is considered how you, in the Roman pagan mind, you get victories by, letting your god be involved in the battle by putting their symbol on your shields, and the men's shields, their breast armor, and all that. And so, but they didn't do this. They did other pagan gods around the shields, but nothing about Jesus. Anyway, in 321 AD, Constantine interfered with Christian worship on Sabbath by proclaiming all must rest on Sunday, the day of the sun, which he meant by that the god Sol Invictus. He uses the name sun, Sol, in Latin, and he calls it the venerable day of worship. So that's the day he wanted people to worship, on the day of the sun, and he wanted, by implication, you to stop doing it on Shabbat. Okay, and he's going to make it very, very clear when we get to Nicaea in 325 how you could never imagine going back and going to Shabbat. You'd be like, a heretic. Okay, this is the coin I'm talking about. So this is a standard coin. This is 317 AD. So this is, well, how many years after his alleged, quote, conversion? 312 AD? No. So this is on the left is Constantine. On the right is Sol Invictus, who's usually shown with a solar crown. He's holding the globe in one hand, and basically, and then it says on here he's a friend of Sol Invictus. So I mean, it's Constantine's name on the left, by the way, so it can be easily read. So this is a really high quality version of that coin. So I mean, so there you have physical proof. He is continuing to support Sol Invictus as his main god. And do Christians not know this at the time? You can look in your coin in your pocket and you know he's a pagan. So why are they pretending and writing books, making it sound like this man is seriously a Christian? And that's what I want you to understand. They all know they're lying. All the Christian leaders that we think are Christian leaders are not Christians. Do you hear me? They're not. I'm talking even about Eusebius. I've come to the conclusion these men are not Christians. These men, all of them, Rufinus, Constantine, of course he's not a Christian. They're all not Christians. These are bootlickers and parasites. That's what they ended up being. These were the worst of the worst. These were special invitees to Nicaea, and those who didn't come were basically people say, hey, what happened to all those people? The ones that didn't come. Did they get their paychecks because now he's putting us on payroll? I don't think so. Were they excluded? Well, we're not going to hear anything about that history, but that is the history we need to see. So if you get all these, the only people who show up are the only people who are going to get any rewards. So he's not going to get, if he's going to send five of those who showed up and didn't agree to the Jesus being God, 5 get exiled outside the kingdom. What do you think he's doing to the people who didn't even show up? So we don't realize he cleansed out the church of all the people who weren't willing to play his game, and only those who were willing to play his game got to play in the game and hold some sort of status, and then to be allowed to write books like Eusebius and all these other people. But they all know they're bootlickers and parasites for paychecks. That's what's going on here. And but they're gonna seem extremely pious. They've learned how to talk in a pious, Christian way, but there's nothing there anymore. It's done. He has eviscerated the church. And wait till you see some of this stuff. I'm going to read you Theodoret, and he's going to quote something that's horrific, and how he could do it as a Christian there recording it. Oh my gosh! So wait till you see that. So anyway, so his plan was to make Jesus into Sol Invictus. So you see on the left there, this is from the grotto of St. Peter's Basilica at the Vatican City, where Sol Invictus Temple once was initially adapted by the new Constantinian Christianity 325 plus, meaning sometime after that point. On the vaulted ceiling of the Tomb of July, also known as the Mausoleum M, it depicts Christ as the sun god Sol Invictus riding in his chariot. Please note the solar rays from his head. It's not merely halo. Do you see those? That's how Sol Invictus was depicted, and he was usually depicted as having horses that he'd be in a chariot, and he would be leading his horses as he's going into the sun. Okay, so this is exactly what Christ is on the left. Sol Invictus, completely depicted exactly like he's supposed to be. This is how our Christ was tamed by the pagan Constantine, and it's right there in the Vatican floors. So he's a clear fraud. Constantine, a few months before Nicaea, inaugurated Constantinople as a new city, but only used pagan priests, no Christian priests. So was he trying to even be friendly to us at that time? He didn't care. He's ordering us to show up months from now, and he's supposedly doing it because he's had some sort of vision, but he's not telling anybody that. Not in order to come. He's just ordering. Remember, he's Pontifex Maximus. He's legally the high priest of every religion in Rome, pagan, Christian, whatever. It doesn't matter. So he can tell you to show up to Timbuktu, and you got to go. And if you don't go, you're going to be exiled from the kingdom, which is a death sentence in those days. After Nicaea, Constantine erects at the center of Constantinople a statue on top of a pillar of the god of the sun, Sol Invictus. Now, this is the key. 3 years. 3 years after Nicaea, he's doing this. And people are going to talk to you as if this man was a Christian all of the time. You're going to see with your own eyes what these Christians are tolerating as permissible behavior of a Christian. Just you use your own head. The coup de grace is Constantine had his face in 40-foot marble placed at the face as the face of Sol Invictus, or he was actually called Apollo in this region because this is a Greek-speaking region of the Empire of Rome. This is really a kind of a Greek territory. It's across the Aegean Sea from Greece, so he was mostly known as Apollo in that region. But it would be in a Latin word, you call him Sol Invictus. Okay, and so here's the facts, religious policies of Constantine Wikipedia article, all with proper sites, and you can check them each. They're linked and active. On 8th of November, 324, this is about 6 months prior to the Nicene Convocation. He consecrates Byzantium as his new residence, Constantinopolis, with the local pagan priests, astrologers, and augurs. No Christians, nothing like that. Oops, it changed, but fine. November 328, this is about 3 years after the 325 Nicene Conference. He has new rituals to dedicate the city as the new capital of the Roman Empire. Among the attendants were the Neoplatonist philosopher Sopater and Pontifex Maximus. I think that means himself because he's the Pontifex Maximus. In commemoration, Constantine had a statue of the goddess of fortune Tyche built. That's pagan. And the colonnade of porphyry where he placed a golden statue of Apollo with the face of Constantine looking toward the sun. The face of Constantine was on the statue, and this is what they recreated. So here's the actual face that was on this statue, okay, and it was put in a museum. Thank God, because we can now, it's not just an argument. You can see what it is, and it has dowel holes in the head for the raised solar crown. And he was depicted naked in the middle of the center, and he was put on this pillar. And then there was some the two thieves cross was under two crosses of the thieves were in there. So let's see. The sanctuary was located at the base, containing supposedly the two crosses from the thieves crucified with Jesus, the basket from the fish and the loaves miracle, and an alabaster ointment jar used in the anointment of Jesus. And if you've got like $50, I have a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn. You believe any of this? Now, systematic lies. These aren't true. These relics are not true. This is just all made up 300 years after the fact. Come on. This guy was a fraudster, a charlatan of the worst kind. And you can see he's depicting himself, the center there with the raised solar crown, for everybody to see that he is Sol Invictus. He is Apollo for the Greeks, Sol Invictus to the Romans. He's put his face on that god, that pagan god's face, and he wants worship. This man thinks he's God. And remember, he's changed Jesus into Sol Invictus, so he can actually believe he is Jesus personified again. So this man is sick, and we're going to see he is totally mentally ill because he is just crazy. And another interesting thing is one of that Reformation website. He says Apollyon the Destroyer is the name of the angel of the bottomless pit in Apocalypse. That's Revelation chapter 9, verse 11. Something to think about because we're going to see at the end. There's a very interesting article about is Constantine the Antichrist? It's a possibility, or a Antichrist. Now, we learned last time that Paul abolished or undermined Sabbath along with all law given Moses. Now, this is ideal for Constantine's plan. He wants a Christianity that has no religious contours, meaning shapeless, so he can actually reform it. And if you don't realize it, but the law gives shape and contour that a pagan can't break through because all these laws are in the barrier. You have restrictions. You have the name of God has to be Yahweh. You have to, honor your mother and father. You have to, not use the word Yahweh in vain. You have to, not take oaths falsely. All these different things that are restrictive and bind people and make people focus on God, right? And Shabbat is the one day you're supposed to actually take from the week to rest and make it a focus day on Yahweh and prayer and all these other things, and but most primarily to rest. Anyway, we saw last time we were in the episode, it was Colossians 2, verses 14 to 16. Paul abolished, quote, the ordinances that were against us. He cited the days as something we shouldn't do, and he meant the Sabbath day. Besides, all the law, including the Ten Commandments, were abolished. That's what Luther and Calvin agreed. It was when he says that he abolished the ordinances that were against us, he meant everything, including the days, he mentions days specifically, and he meant Sabbath days in the sentence structure he used. We saw the Galatians 1, verses 8 to 9, chapter 2, verses 15, 16, chapter 3, verses 10 to 14. He said the law was given Moses by angels, not God, and trying to obey the law to observe days that meant Sabbath leads to only a curse if you fail even just one time, misquoting, of course, Deuteronomy 27, verse 26, and causes bondage again to those who are no gods and weak and beggarly elements, the angels. And then he says the Sinai covenant is bondage, and Agar, who was the handmaiden of Abraham, is corresponds to Israel instead of Sarah's children would be corresponding to Israel. That's biblical. He just rewrote the Bible and said, no, Israel corresponds to the children of Agar, and Agar was cast out into the desert to fend for herself, and that was so. Israel today is actually Agar's children cursed like Agar was cursed. And he says observing days, meaning Sabbath days, is bondage. Okay, so we're going to break here for a second, and we'll get the next verse on Paul, the next slide on Paul. Okay, and then we're going to see Paul, as last time we pointed out, Romans 14, 5 to 6. Basically, it's an idealization of lackadaisicalness. So he actually says, one man considers one day more sacred than another. Another man considers every day alike. Each one should be fully convinced in his own mind. So basically, it's all up to you. It's okay if you want to take it seriously, but you don't have to. It's okay. God doesn't care. I mean, this is the most horrific teacher of all time, and yet Christians treat him as if he should be taken seriously. This is nonsense. It's apostasy on a high level. Okay, anyway, now I want to read you a speech that Constantine gives at Nicaea and ending Passover observance. So the other, you've got Sabbath you've got that as a problem, a blockade for him, but he wants worship for Sol Invictus, right? And so now it has to be a sun-centered date for the resurrection of the sun. And when does that happen? It happens at equinox. So he's got to find a way to get the Christians not to realize what he's really doing. He's trying to move the day to worship the resurrection of Jesus is to the resurrection of his God, Sol Invictus, when the sun begins getting longer and longer at the vernal equinox every year. So, when you get to the springtime, we call it spring. Well, actually, the sun starts going down, down, and down to a certain point, and then it starts going back up and having longer days, and that's called the vernal equinox. And that's where he's going to put Easter, and that is why Easter was picked, because that's the goddess Easter, Osiris. It may be actually a male god now that I think about it. Osiris, I think, is a man. And anyway, so the point is that would be perfect, because now we wouldn't be aware of what we're really doing, and he's going to make us think we're worshiping Jesus, but he knows in his mind that we're worshiping him, which is his objective long term, that we are now every Easter Osiris rises, and that gives Osiris a resurrection. And that's what he wants us to be doing. So he's gonna couch it in virulent anti-Semitism. All right, and so just one thing we need to know is the Passover, in fact, was being used in the earliest church. It's reflected right in the book of Acts. It's in Acts 21, verse 1. Where it says, King Herod began to persecute the church, culminating the brutal death of the Apostle James by sword. This pleased the Jews so much that the Apostle Peter was also asked to take a prisoner. The plan was later to deliver him to the Jews. And verse 3 says this: these were the days of unleavened bread. Being ignorant Christians as we are, we don't know how that's connected to Passover, but I'll get to it. The New Testament church was observing these feast days described in Leviticus 23. Now read verse 4. And when Herod had apprehended him, he put in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternion soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter, yes, that's in your King James Bible, to bring him forth to the people. Is this a biblical authority for Easter? So says the article, The True Origin of Easter. Well, of course not. Why? Because it's not really there. It's a fake word put there to make you think it's there, but it's not there. So this is imagination again. This is lying to the reader that there's a word there that isn't there. This word is Easter is a pagan word, actually Gaelic word. So it couldn't have possibly been the right word. It would have been used up in the British Isles, in the the Irish people used that, and in Germany they had Ostara was the similar word. So this is not even Greek. Now, the Greek word used here was Pascha, which is the word standing for Passover, which is actually a Hebrew word in Greek. So Hebrew sometimes would be loaned to Greek, and the Greek would use the Hebrew word because they got used to using the word. And the word was Pascha, meaning Passover. So the passage is not talking about Easter. How do we know the word translated Easter is the Greek word Pascha, derived from the Hebrew word Pesach? There is no original Greek word for Passover, and it has only one meaning. It always means Passover. It can never mean Easter, because there is no Easter. There is no Easter in the meaning of Pascha. For this reason, we find a Hebrew word used in the Greek New Testament. Once again, this Hebrew word can only refer to Passover, and other translations, including the Revised Standard Version, correctly render this word Passover. Now, I want to repeat this again. People are going to tell you, oh, it's not a big deal. It's just like Paul said. One person calls it Sunday, Saturday. They want to rest on Shabbat. That's up to you. It's all up to you. You can call it and do whatever you want. So we have the most lackadaisical system of beliefs that we're complete sponges. We'll do whatever somebody tells us to do, and we don't think. We have turned our brains off, and that's what a Constantinian Christian is all about. Turn the brains off. Stop thinking, and do not contemplate what your Lord is all about. Do not learn to love who he really is and what he stands for. So the people who don't care about this don't understand that Passover is the feast that Jesus actually said to observe. He didn't say to observe communion. Did you know that? Paul says that. But Jesus says to observe this each year and do this in remembrance of me. He's doing a Passover dinner that's clearly implied because it's Passover. And he's breaking the bread and offering the cup that are done at Passover. And then he says, do this in remembrance of me. And that's where you eat, you drink the wine, and you eat the bread. He says, this is going to be a symbol of my bread and my body. Do this in remembrance of me. Is it a crime to hold a communion each week? No, it's not a crime, but it's not mandatory. It's not required. And but it could be socially good. It could be beneficial. It could be edifying. But the real thing you need to be doing is having a Passover Seder each year. If you want to follow what Jesus actually said to do, and to do it in remembrance of him, and then follow this custom, and then do your communion in that custom of remembering the wonderful things Yahweh has done for his people. That includes the people of Israel, who are part of our family of believers. And now what's Constantine going to do? He's going to try to destroy this relationship we should be having with Jewish people. Okay. Now, the Restored Church of God, who wrote this article, so I'm just kind of borrowing it. Here it is. This is their link and everything. So it was called The True Origin of Easter by Mr. Pack. He's going to say the mistranslation of Acts 12 verses 4 is not so subtle an attempt to insert a pagan festival into Scripture for the purpose of authorizing it. We will examine the Passover more closely later. Well, that's a very nice way of saying they're lying to you, and they do it for a reason, to make you think that Easter is an appropriate word to use biblically, that you could put it in the Bible. You could put this sacrilegious term in there and not realize you're discouraging people to realize that Passover is an important festival to observe as a Christian. Okay, this is interesting. It may be theoretically it's optional, because you didn't, as a Gentile, you do not have to go to Passover, because if you do, you have to be circumcised. So if you believe this is what you want to do communion, and you want to do it the right way, you need to be circumcised to do Passover. But if you haven't been circumcised, you're not required to do Passover. So, but you don't get to do what you think is the communion thing. So that's that's your choice. But the point is, Jesus meant for us to remember it as the Passover, and he's the Passover lamb. So what is Passover? The Passover account is found in Exodus 12, verses 12 to 14. Verse 14 states that the Passover ceremony was commanded by God to be an annual memorial feast to be kept by Israel forever. And this command is kept in your home with your family. It was interesting, one of those interesting festivals. Now, it doesn't mean there isn't a sacrifice going on in the center of Jerusalem in those days, but that's not going on anymore. So our Paschal lamb is who? Jesus. And so we don't need to do all of the sacrifice anymore. Okay. This command is repeated in Leviticus 23, verse 5. Exodus 12, verse 15 introduces the 7-day festival called the Days of Unleavened Bread. It's also repeated in Leviticus 23, verses 6 to 8, which is to immediately follow the Passover feast each year. This is why Acts 12:3 states, quote, then were the days of unleavened bread before mentioning the Passover in the next verse, which is mistranslated as Easter. These days were always kept in conjunction with one another. Okay, so I'm going to take a break here, but you can see we are deliberately lied by in our Bible, it's unconscionable, because then we don't know what we're supposed to do, and the only thing we think is, Paul has this verse about, when you come together for your feasts, and you take the bread and the wine, all this kind of stuff. He's doing something that there's no evidence that was what was the early church was doing. He started something up, apparently kind of on his own. The Passover, that's what the early church was recorded doing, and doing the remembrances in that context. Anyway, we're going to take a break and come right back. Okay, and this again, this Restored Church of God, and again, I know nothing about them. They could be I don't know what their principles are, but they make good points. Christ is the Lamb of God. They have their citations. Replace the Old Testament lamb. I would say Old Testament, the original covenant lamb, eaten on Passover evening each year. The New Testament symbols of the bread and wine were instituted so that Christians could eat the body and drink the blood of Christ, symbolically the true Lamb of God. Jesus' sacrifice replaced the need to kill a spring lamb. So we don't have to kill lambs. We can use bread and wine, as he did, as a symbol, right? Luke 22, verse 19 shows that Jesus substituted the bread and wine to be taken annually in commemoration of his sacrifice for the remission of our sins, both spiritual and physical. And there's the web page if you want to read this article. Good article. All right. So then just to show you a little bit more of Constantine and his approach to Judaism, In 329, he issued laws prohibiting mixed marriages of Jews and Christians. Why would you get involved in that? If they want to marry and one's Jewish, one's Christian, let them do that. Wouldn't that lead to conversion of the Jewish person? But he prohibits it. Then he punished by death the conversion of Christians to Judaism. So there's no religious freedom, just so you know, that he's allowing. Because if you want to become a Jewish person, go to become Jewish, or let me suggest this to you. I'm going to tell you, I think what he would say is if you started observing Sabbath, because he's trying to get people to stop doing Sabbath, right? He would say, well, maybe you're trying to you've converted to Judaism. We have to execute you. So, I mean, this is now intimidating people by this death penalty over a quote conversion to Judaism, which can happen. What can happen in just reading your Bible doesn't mean somebody else has led you to be conversion. You just converted. So again, you can just see death penalties. This guy is not a Christian, not by a long shot. In fact, he's a barbaric madman and a hater of Jews. Unbelievable. So this is in Constantine the Great and Judaism. It's that Wikipedia article, and I'm going to read to you what he said in Isaiah to convince the Christians to stop a Passover observance and to switch it to the equinox date, which would match Easter. Okay, fits that date. What's the reason he gave for this? He demanded the council with a blood libel everywhere. He used race hatred of the worst kind. But by the way, Theodoret is quoting this as a pious statement. You're going to see, I'm going to show you the introduction to this by Theodoret, the historian, the Christian historian, saying this is a pious statement, meaning a religiously sensitive and wonderful, sweet thing. Listen to what he introduces. Wait, you know what? I'm going to show you. This is how he introduces it. The Emperor Constantine, concerning the matters transacted at the council, addressed to those bishops who were not present. So he writes this in a letter. And let me see if you can see this. Let me just get something out of the way here. The great emperor also wrote an account of the transactions of the council, blah, 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 blah. This clearly evidences the piety of the writer, meaning Constantine. Now, tell me what you're going to read if you see any piety in this. Here he goes, Constantine, in this letter to all the bishops that didn't show up. It was in the first place declared improper to follow the custom of the Jews in the celebration of this holy festival, Passover, because their hands have been stained with crime. These minds of these wretched men are necessarily blinded. Let us then have nothing in common with the Jews or our adversaries, avoiding all contact with that evil way. For how can they entertain right views on any point who, after having compassed the death of the Lord, being out of their minds, are guided not by sound reason, but by an unrestrained passion wherever their innate madness carries them, lest your pure minds should appear to share in the customs of a people so utterly depraved. Therefore, this irregularity must be corrected in order that we may no more have anything in common with these parricides, these murderers of our Lord, no single point in common with the perjury of the Jews. That's a Christian? That is a madman. That is an insane, sick mind. And this is Theodoret calling it what? Pious? Clearly evidences the piety of the writer. Now, you have to laugh when you see that. And I have to conclude, all these guys are frauds. They're bootlickers. They're frauds. They're paid perjurers. They're willing to say and do anything they have to keep their paychecks, because you would never say this in a million years. And part of me wonders, is it possible these guys put in such idiotic statements so that you would know they're so ridiculous, so idiotic, that he's doing it under coercion? And he can't possibly believe this is a pious statement. I just read it to you. This is from his book, Theodoret. But I say here, bootlicker, sycophant, or a put-on artist. I mean, it's comical almost. But this is what Christian authorities present to us. You could read, Philip Schaff presents this as if this is some serious literature, that this is truly what this guy means, that you should take him at face value, that he thinks this is pious ways of talking. This is hate. This is hate and murder. And Jesus says, what is hate? Hatred is murder. He's a murderer. He murdered his son. He murdered his nephew. He's a murderer. And he murders people. And he lied to us about his conversion. He's lying about himself caring about Christianity. He lies that he isn't, following his pagan. Well, he never denies he's a pagan. He doesn't give up his Sol Invictus religion. It's obvious. There is something wrong, ladies and gentlemen, that the historians can't. This is not hidden. This is just not discussed. It's not exposed to you. I just want to show you what you're supposed to do when you want to break down and see what is this guy all about. Here's all the insults of hatred in that remark. And so you just have to say, what's the mind of this person like? He's, quote, declared it improper to follow the custom of the Jews in the celebration of this holy festival, Passover. So Constantine is commanding you not to do this. And can you do it anymore? No. You're going to be disinherited. This is called the quarter-deciman controversy. You're going to be excommunicated. You're not going to be able to worship. You're not going to be able to, if you can't be a bishop, you lose your offices. Everything is contingent on you following this man. He's your Pontifex Maximus. This is not C.S. Lewis writing a nice letter, I think you should do this. This is the man who's in charge of your religion. He is the true pontiff. By law, he can command you to do whatever he wants you to do, and they're bootlickers, and they're parasites, and they're sycophants. Either they're sycophants, bootlickers, or whatever. They're cowards, all of them. All of these Christians that put up with this and didn't all rebel and said, we'd rather die. You told us you were going to tolerate us. You didn't tell us you were going to take us over and expropriate the religion we believed in and tell us how to worship Jesus as God. You took the name of God and you just made it disappear. You made the Jews abhorrent. You are an evil man. That's what these men should have all said. And we'll rather die upside down, hanging by our legs than to worship you, because that's what he wanted. He wanted worship of him. I go on. I digress. Let us then have nothing in common with the Jews, who are our adversaries, stained with crime, out of their minds, people so utterly depraved, avoiding all contact with that evil way. This is a sick mind. This man is insane. And yet our Christian pastor, you ask your Christian pastor, what do you think of Constantine? I'm going to show you articles by people who have clearly read all this. They don't care that he put himself on a statue. They don't care. They don't care that he wanted worship as Sol Invictus. They don't care. They actually make excuses for it, and you'll see the excuses they make. I collected it because it's so outlandish. We may no more have anything in common with those parricides. That means he says that's a murder of your father. He's claiming they martyred God the Father, which, by the way, tells you another thing. In the religion of Sol Invictus, he's trying to say is you can actually murder God, because another way of thinking is the God is like a human being who's just super powerful, supernatural kind of thing. So theoretically, you could maybe murder him. I mean, who knows? So he's actually thinking you could murder God, and that's what they did by killing Jesus. It's just crazy. And then the murderer of our Lord. No single point in common with the perjury. Let's have no single point in common with the perjury of the Jews. So this is what he told us is why he was moving it from the what's called 14th day of Nisan. That quarter-deciman, by the way, is a word of saying you believe in the 14th Nisan is the day it should be Jesus' resurrection should be honored, and he's moving it over here to the equinox, the vernal equinox, and he doesn't tell you this is the day to worship Easter and all the days get longer and longer and longer. So the resurrection of the sun is what he wants you to be thinking about. But he's not telling you. It's all a secret. He's keeping you in the dark. And he's just hating on the people who want you to worship, remember Jesus' resurrection at the time of 14th of Nisan. Okay, so this is just a con job. And this is what got me in the end. And this is a chapter 9 of Theodoret's work, and it's entitled, well, let's read this whole sentence. The great emperor also wrote the account of the transactions of the councils to those bishops who were unable to attend, and I consider it worthwhile to insert this epistle in my work, as it clearly evidences the piety of the writer. The piety of the writer. Again, can you imagine anybody thinking what I just read to you is pious? That it comes from a religious spirit of sensitivity and love and concern for the flock. Oh my God, it was full of hate. Couldn't Theodoret have literally meant this? And if he did, his mind is sick. He is a bootlicker. He's a sycophant, or he's some sort of put-on artist. He's like a comic or something, or it makes sick jokes. But I'm sorry to say, probably no. He could not seriously. And that's the other thing. Could these guys seriously meant that? Eusebius says some things that are so outlandish, you have to believe he's trying to tell us something. I am being forced to say things that I don't believe in, that I want you to know are so ridiculous that I have to say it's a good thing. It's because this guy's standing over me. His name is Constantine. He'll cut my head off if I put down anything that's true. And I think, what else can explain why Theodoret would write something like this? This is pious? Give me a break. It's just so sick. Okay. Now, so Constantine instilled hatred for Judaism in his followers to justify destroying the apostolic lessons. And this is from Kelly MacDonald. He writes for a journal, Quarter-Deciman Controversy, and he writes, the Quarter-Deciman Controversy was part of the movement by the Church of Rome to abandon any practices considered Jewish. Now, it was not a movement by the Church of Rome. And see, this is wrong. It's trying to make it sound like this is blessed by the church. The church is under pressure. It's ordered by the Pontifex Maximus legal authority, Constantine, a pagan who's proven before and after Nicaea he is a pagan. And he was a pagan all the way since his alleged conversion in 312 AD, where he hadn't communicated with any Christians from 312 to 324. He was not trying to coordinate with us or be social with Christians or get to know Christianity. He comes out of the blue just to tell us how he wants us to treat Jesus as God. He ends up making the final decision. That's what everybody agrees. He forged a compromise. They couldn't get the Arians together with the Athanasians, so he had to make the decision. He said, "This is what you're going to do." It's one substance. They're one substance. They're God. They're both God physically. They're one substance. Homonaceus or whatever it was. Their actions, so then he says, but he has this correct. Their actions were contrary to those taught by the first epistles. So this Roman Catholic Church was acting at behest of Constantine, and he says their actions were contrary to those taught by the first apostles. Moreover, this controversy was eventually used to push the idea of weekly fasting on Fridays and Sunday gatherings. That's not important. Okay, and I think we've already talked about there was coercion for the 5 bishops who did not go along with the bideity of Jesus and God at the Nicaea were exiled. And they make a big deal. Oh, well, later they were unexiled. Well, what do you think they had to do to get that? They had to go along, right? So it's not like you have to face reality. People there were forced to say Jesus is God, or else they were going to be exiled. So, I mean, and that also shows you how many bootlickers and sycophants and people went there who could literally succumb to a horrible heresy. Jesus said the Father is the only true God. Do you think every single one of them had not read that verse in John 17 verses 1-3? Do you think they were all numb, that they had somehow forgotten that? And you think, and then here's the funny thing about Constantinian Christians. They don't realize all the writings going back were all rewritten backwards. Meaning the victorious Constantinian Christians, which are these sycophant bootlickers, they're the ones now rewriting what you think are epistles from Irenaeus, Epiphanius, and whatever, to make it look like the doctrine of the Trinity had been accepted much, much earlier. They did the best they could. Rufinus, he is the main corrupter. He is just this campaigner. And we're going to show you what he did to Origen's works. We're going to show you a video by a gentleman who did a fantastic job showing you how Rufinus made it look like and fooled people for hundreds of years, millennia, that these works that he had rewritten, we couldn't tell that he was he fraudulently revised them until we found some of the actual Greek texts that he all tossed away. He always would take the original Greek stuff, rewrite it, put in the modern doctrines that were going backwards, being instilled back in time, and then he would destroy the original text that he had. But you know what? He forgot, or there were a few errant Greek texts of Origen that reappear, and it shows that he was not using the original text of Origen, and the true Origen didn't hold the view of the Trinity that Rufinus put in his mouth and was quoted over and over again to prove Origen believed in the Trinity. See, so this is the sick era. You don't realize this is censorship at a whole new level. And Christians who want to believe a certain thing can say, hey, see, it's there over there, but they're not looking at the big picture. This is a monumental fraud machine, propaganda machine. You think our government today can generate propaganda? You don't know what propaganda is like. This was propaganda for a person named Constantine who believed he was Sol Invictus and put his face on a statue in the middle of Constantinople, making himself God. He is a psychopath. He's a maniac. He's a murderer, killer, hater of Jews. And a manipulator par excellence and threatens death and destruction. And if you didn't go along with the change from Passover to Easter, this goddess based system, you can't inherit property. You're fined. Yeah, you're exiled. All kinds of things. These were the Quartodecimans. They were persecuted as heretics. All right. So so and then you go to the Vineyard, webpage, and I'm not picking on any of them in particular, but they're giving a summary of the Constantinian Christianity. This is the bootlicking today. It's maybe it's not their fault because they're not researching who is this Constantine. So they go this whole thing about the Quarter-Deciman controversy was, well, Rome's bishop could not convince Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna, to change, nor could Polycarp convince Anicetus about is it Passover or is it Easter? Okay, so in spirit of love, they agreed to disagree. Rome continued to celebrate Easter Sunday, and believers in the Assembly of Asia, now smeared by the Romans as the Quartodecimans, 14ers, held fast to the instructions Polycarp received from the Apostle John. Wait a minute. I can't inherit though if I go one way. I can't. I'm going to get fined over here. I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be exiled and excommunicated. These are not like agreeing to disagree. One group is being censored and punished for holding beliefs that don't conform to orthodoxy. This isn't a free system. This is not agree to disagree. One group is being persecuted and the other is treated as orthodox, and they're sailing away. As long as you stick with Constantine, you're okay. This is not an agree to agree situation. All right. And then there was a sub argument. So I'm not going to get into that. But the question is, if Passover Sabbath ended up causing the day of resurrection celebration to be other than a Sunday, should you be strict and just follow whatever that day is of the day of the week, or should you try to move it to the next Sunday after 14 Nisan? So the church originally seemed to be, it was strictly according to what would ever be the third day after 14 Nisan. But then some people said, no, let's do it on a Sunday after Nissan so we can keep Sunday there. So you know what? That's a judgment call, but that's not what the Quarter-Deciman controversy was about. It was, should it be a Passover rule or should it be at this vernal equinox date? All right. Now, there's a growing consensus, it seems, from non-Christian scholars that Constantine was basically putting the Christians on, defrauding them. But they don't quite put it that way. But that he was always still a worshiper of Sol Invictus. Well, of course he was. But he was never a true Christian because you can't imagine him being what he was. Okay. But here's an interesting article. I just want to throw this in before we close up. Is Constantine the Antichrist? And this article, actually, I had never thought about it. Makes a good argument. It's at this website, messengersofmessiah.org, and it's called The Man of Lawlessness Apostate Church. It's a PDF. And he says, in this study, we will show that the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great fits the prophetic picture of the man of lawlessness in every detail. We will also prove from the word of God that the Roman church established by Constantine is the apostate church apostasy. But one thing I want to say is we don't realize that as Protestants, we didn't really disconnect. We don't follow Sabbath. We don't follow Passover. We keep Easter. We don't do anything really radical. The only thing we were told that was new and different is we don't have to do any good works. We can just believe in faith alone and we're saved. And therefore we don't, we shouldn't be misled by having to do indulgences, because that was that we were being exploited by the Roman Catholic Church, saying, hey, you want to get your family out of purgatory, just give us some cash. We'll give you a certificate in writing that we will release, Uncle John, Aunt Jerry, whoever. We're going to take your relative and give them a free pass out of purgatory. Okay, so just hand me $15 and, there's your aunt, there's your uncle. I mean, that's what they were doing to build the basilica at St. Peter's Basilica over the temple of Sol Invictus. So that's what it was all about. Millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars were gotten to. So that St. Peter's Basilica is built on what? Fraud, religious fraud, but pious in the sense that we're trying to build a basilica. I get it. But try to do it in an honest way where you don't make up something like that kind of. Is God seriously taking the $15 you gave to gave to the Vatican as grounds to release your family from purgatory. And how do you know? I mean, it's just is so manipulative, people. And thank God the Roman Catholic Church didn't do that, and he doesn't do that anymore. I hope not. And then, but here's one. Here's a mainstream exegetical commentator, Gary Shogan. He does a lot of commentaries on Paul's epistles, and his conclusion. And I assume he's done, if you just barely look at Wikipedia, you can't miss the fact that this event happened 3 years after Nicaea, where Constantine's face, 40-foot face, is put on top of a pillar to the image of Apollo / Sol Invictus, so everybody could worship it. I showed you that at the beginning of this video. And that is 3 years later. You can't believe this man is a Christian. You have to be delusional. But he writes this: my take is that Constantine was hardly a fake Christian, but neither was his conversion a model one. Perhaps he is like the modern politician who has a sincere faith in Christ, who emphasizes that faith in order to curry favor with voters, but he falls short of being an example of consistent Christian thought and action. I have to conclude, why would a scholar like this even go this far to say that? He really should say, I've not studied this topic enough. I don't know enough, maybe, and haven't read enough to even know everything. Because obviously, I can't believe he knows about that statue. Okay, I mean, and it's proof positive. There's no doubt about it. And the coin program and all the other facts that prove that he was not a Christian, and his murderousness and all that. And he knows about the murders. He mentions that. He says, well, nobody's perfect. No, that's not how it works. That's not how Christianity works. If someone says, I believe, look at his life. His fruits are continually evil up to the date of his death. And he never got baptized until the, quote, end. And people don't really believe he was really baptized. He's dying and somebody baptized him. That wasn't him being baptized, but that's a whole nother story. Okay, and then I'm going to tell you, Philip Schaff is a bootlicker. He knows how bad this guy is. The great church historian Philip Schaff wrote, quote, he was distinguished by that genuine political wisdom which, putting itself at the head of the age, clearly saw that idolatry had outlived itself in the Roman Empire, and that Christianity alone could breathe new vigor into it and furnish its moral support. I'm sorry. No, he did. He did the Milvian Bridge triumphal arch at Rome. I hope Philip Schaff had a chance to go there. Now he worked in New York at Theological Union Seminary. Maybe he didn't get to do that, but all you got to do is go over to the Constantine Arch, look at the images on it. You see they're all pagan gods, including Sol Invictus, are being all thanked for the Milvian Bridge victory. It shows you the diagram at the bottom of the Milvian Bridge enemy falling into the river and dying and drowning. There's manuals that explain this, show that you in the guidebooks. This is a testimony to the 312 AD Milvian Bridge victory, which is where Constantine said he got the sign from Jesus Christ, saying, in this sign, this key row, you're going to win. So where's the image of Jesus? Where's the image of the cross on anywhere on this arch? It's not there. So how do you, Mr. Schaff, say this man's a Christian? And did you not know about the coin issues? Did you not know about the issue in Byzantium, Constantinople? I mean, it's bootlicking. And did you know of that horrible speech from Theodoret? I'm pretty sure you did, because it's in your book. It's in your post-Nicene Fathers book. And so that I think Mr. Schaff deserves the label of bootlicker, because he's just making you think Constantine is a regular Christian guy. And okay, I think we'll get into these other things later, and we'll just move on from here and hope that this was an introduction to, in essence, the next level, which is to show you the pervasiveness of rewriting history by this group, so that it seems like it's shocking to even say the obvious, is that these doctrines that at Nicaea were never, they were able to create romances back in history, just rewrite books from the past and make things look like they existed beforehand that were never there in people's minds or thoughts. And we're going to see this pervasively in the writings of Origen next time. Okay, God bless. Take care, everybody. Ciao.